Greetings, this is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to take a look at the second level cleric spells in Unearthed Arcana. So again, as with the first level spells, there are 20 second level cleric spells, of which 8 are new, and we will be discussing these. So the first one is called Aid, and it affects one person that the cleric must touch. The recipient of the spell gains the benefit of a blessed spell and a special benison of 1 to 8 additional hit points. The bless lasts as long as the aid spell, as do the hit points thus gained, and that duration is 1 round plus 1 round per level of the cleric. The aid allows a character to actually have more hit points than the character's full normal total. The added hit points last only for the duration of the aid spell. Any damage taken by the recipient while the aid spell is in effect is taken off the 1 to 8 additional hit points before regular ones are lost. Hit points bestowed by an aid spell and then lost cannot be regained by curative magic. For example, a first level fighter has 8 hit points, takes 2 points of damage, and then receives an aid spell which gives him 6 additional hit points. The fighter now has 12 hit points, 6 of which are temporary. If he is then hit for 7 points of damage, 1 regular point, and all 6 of the temporary points are lost. Material component for this spell are a tiny strip of white cloth with a sticky substance, such as a tree sap, on the ends, plus the cleric's holy symbol. While this spell is not a classic that everyone remembers, it does this thing of temporary hit points, which I don't recall being in any of the player's handbook spells. Somebody let me know if I'm wrong on this. But temporary hit points were a new thing as far as I recall, and it's certainly become very prevalent in more modern versions of D&D, so this might be the source of it, or one of them, because I do know other spells in this book provide temporary hit points. The next spell is Detect Life. And by use of this spell, a cleric can tell if a target creature is alive. The magic will detect life in the recipient of a feigned death spell or someone in a coma, death-like trance, or state of suspended animation. If cast upon the body of a creature that is engaged in astral travel, it will reveal that the creature is alive. The spell works on plants and plant creatures as well as animals. The spell's range is diminished if more than a 1-inch thickness of wood or stone lies between the cleric and the subject. Each inch of wood or stone barrier is treated as 10 feet of open space. A barrier of metal of any thickness will cause the spell to fail and be ruined. Any form of mental protection, including those of psionic or magical nature, will likewise ruin the spell without anything being detected. The spell will detect the first living creature that lies along the cleric's line of sight and within range, or else the first creature that crosses the line of sight path before the duration expires. This is another spell that's a little bit nerfed, meaning it allows you to detect one creature and tells you it's alive, but that last sentence, it detects the first living creature that lies along the cleric's lines of sight. What's the first creature that crosses your line of sight when you're surrounded by trees and grass and insects and all sorts of other living things? If I was to run this spell, I would say that the cleric can focus the spell on a creature to detect if it's alive, or you can have it scan an open space to find a living creature. So for example, if I'm in the middle of a desert, it might let me see where there are living creatures, though it might not tell me what kind. So I could always say, oh my god, behind this dune in the sand, there's life, there's something alive. And when you cross over, it's like a scrawny little bush, because it's alive. That already is enough of a nerf on a detect life. The fact that it only detects one creature and then stops working, you don't control what's in your line of sight. You control where you look, but anything can cross that line. So I would state that the cleric can focus on a creature to detect if it's alive. So example, if he wants to see if somebody has a feigned death spell, or if somebody is doing astral travel or anything like that. Or I would say it will let you detect everything that's alive. There, the downside would be that you don't know what kind of life it is. So it could be a plant, it could be an animal, it could be an insect. You could maybe detect how big it is, but that's about it. And if you're surrounded by life like you are in a field or woods, the spell becomes useless because there's so much alive. And that would be enough nerfing in my opinion. I think that last sentence should be struck from that spell for sure. The next spell is Dust Devil. This spell enables a cleric to conjure up a weak air elemental, a dust devil of AC 4, 2 hit dice, movement of 18 inches, 1 attack for 1 to 4 points of damage, which can be hit by normal weapons. Magic weapons of any type will cause it double damage. The dust devil appears as a small whirlwind 5 feet in diameter at its base, 15 feet tall, and 10 feet across at the top. It will move as directed by the cleric, but be dispelled if ordered to go further than 3 inches away from the spellcaster. The winds of the dust devil can hold a gas cloud or a creature in gaseous form at bay or push it away from the caster, though it cannot damage or dispel such a cloud. Its winds are sufficient to put out torches, small campfires, exposed lanterns, and other small open flames of non-magical origin. If skimming along the ground in an area of loose dust, sand, or ash, the dust devil will pick up those particles and disperse them in a cloud 30 feet in diameter centered around the dust devil. Normal vision is not possible through the cloud, and creatures caught in the cloud will be effectively blinded until 1 round after they are free of it. Spellcasting is virtually impossible for someone caught inside such a cloud or inside the dust devil itself. Even if the creature fails to score damage on the victim from the buffeting of its wind, a spellcaster must make a saving throw versus spell to keep his or her concentration and the spell from being ruined. Any creature native to the elemental plane of air, even another creature of the same sort, can dismiss a dust devil at will from a distance of 3 inches or less. Creatures not native to the plane occupied by the spellcaster are not affected by the dust devil. It is automatically dispelled if it contacts any creature with innate magical resistance, but not until after it gets a chance to hit and do damage. So this can be a fun one. Clever player can get his or her cleric to do some interesting things with the dust devil. One problem with it is the 3-round casting time, which means that you got to cast it knowing you're entering a situation where you're going to want that dust devil. You can't just say, oh, we're in combat, a dust devil would be great here, let me cast it, which is a big limitation on it. One I'm willing to live with, since the cleric's not really intended to be very much an offensive spellcaster. With preparation, he can use this for an attack. If you're ambushing someone's camp at night, send that dust devil there and have it wreak some havoc before the fighters attack. There's lots of interesting possibilities with this spell, and I do quite like it. The next spell is Enthrall. A cleric who uses this spell can bind and enthrall an audience that can fully understand his or her language. Listeners of the same race as the cleric are allowed a saving throw versus spell. Those of a different race, which is generally unfriendly to the cleric's race, save at +4. It is impossible to enthrall a character or creature with more than 4 levels or hit dice, or one with a wisdom score greater than 15. To effect this spell, the caster must speak without interruption for a full round. Thereafter, the enchantments last for as long as the cleric keeps speaking, to a maximum of 6 turns. That's a lot of talking. Those who fail their saving throws will view the cleric as if he or she had a charisma of 21, loyalty base plus 70%, reaction adjustment plus 50%. They will stand and listen to the cleric's words, but will not act on them as if a suggestion had been cast. When the cleric stops talking, the spell is broken and the listeners regain control of their own minds. Any form of attack, for example a successful hit or the casting of a spell against the cleric, will instantly cancel the enthrall spell, as will any attempt by the cleric to cast a different spell or perform some other action. Members of the audience who make a successful saving throw will view the cleric as having a charisma of 3. They may 50% chance, hoot and jeer, allowing a new saving throw for others listening. The cleric tries to take undue advantage of the spell by preaching about a religion or alignment opposed to that the members of the audience subscribe. Each offended listener is allowed a new saving throw at +5. So this could be useful. The problem is the individual saving throw is that presumably you're going to be using this spell on a rather large crowd, which makes it a nightmare to run that way. You could run it on a very small group, in which case individual saving throws are fine. Say you have half a dozen people or so you're trying to enthrall. But if you have a large crowd, then that becomes problematic. I don't like the nerfing where if you fail your saving throw, you get a charisma of 3. If members of an audience succeed that saving throw, then I think the cleric's regular charisma should apply, and maybe his own charisma will be enough to convince some people. I think the lowering of the charisma to 3 is annoying. Next spell, Holy Symbol. This spell is used to prepare a cleric's holy symbol or to create a new symbol to replace a lost or damaged one. The new symbol to be, which is the spell's material component, and obviously is not consumed in the casting, must be crafted of appropriate materials depending on the religion and deity in question, and must be of the proper shape and design. A cleric cannot pick up just any item and make it into a holy symbol. A cleric may possess 2 holy symbols at one time, and this spell can be used to create a second one as a spare. No cleric can create a holy symbol related to a religion or deity other than the one that he or she worships. The holy symbol of a good or evil cleric will radiate a faint aura of good or evil, but is not a magical object per se. The holy symbol of a cleric who is of neutral morals with respect to good and evil will have no such aura. I like this spell. It's a spell that was needed. It explains how to make a holy symbol. I know some groups came up with rules for creating holy symbols that were based on the rules for creating other magic items, but the holy symbol in and of its own is not a magical item, so they tended to be overly expensive, and the cost of making one just didn't match up with the cost of purchasing a holy symbol from your local temple. This is a very good addition in my mind to the spell list. The next spell is called Messenger. This spell enables a cleric to call upon a small-sized creature of at least animal intelligence to act as his or her messenger. The spell does not affect creatures that are giant types and will not work on creatures with an intelligence score of 4 or higher, or with a rating of low intelligence or better, whichever applies. The creature is already within range. The cleric, using some type of food desirable to the animal as a lure, can cast the animal to come. The animal is allowed a saving throw versus spell, and if this succeeds, the spell fails. If the saving throw has failed, the animal will advance towards the cleric and await his or her bidding. The cleric can communicate with the animal in a crude fashion, telling it to go to a certain place, but directions must be simple. The spellcaster can attach some small item or note to the animal. If so instructed, the animal will then wait at that location until the duration of the spell expires. Note that unless the intended recipient of a message is expecting a messenger in the form of a small animal or bird, the carrier may be ignored. When the spell's duration expires, the animal or bird will return to its normal activities. The intended receiver of a message gains no communication ability. So this spell lasts 1 hour per level of the cleric. So you start with a 3-hour spell duration, which means that animal cannot go very far. You could send a bird a good distance away, but there's none of that carrier pigeon flying hundreds of kilometers to get somewhere. But a rat or other such creature could cross a siege line. You could also send the messenger into a compound, a castle or something, to contact someone there, hopefully in secret. So this is a useful spell. I quite like it. It's got reasonable limitations, and an imaginative player can do some interesting things with it. The next spell is called Withdraw. By means of a withdraw spell, the cleric effectively alters the flow of time with regards to himself or herself. While but one segment of time passes for those not affected by the spell, the cleric is able to spend 1 round of time in contemplation. The base spell duration is 2 segments, or 2 rounds from the cleric's point of view, and the cleric adds 1 additional increment of time for each level of experience he or she possesses. So you get to start with 5 segments, half a round, but it feels like 5 rounds to you. Thus, at the 5th level of experience, the spellcaster could spend up to 6 rounds cogitating on some matter, while but 6 segments of time pass for all others. This actually contradicts the previous sentence, because if the base spell is 2 segments, and you add 1 additional increment of time, so 1 additional segment for each level of experience, at 5th level you should have 7 rounds of cogitating, not 6. The DM must allow the spellcaster 1 minute of real time per segment to ponder some problem or question. No discussion with non-affected characters is permitted. Note that while affected by the withdraw spell, the cleric can perform only these particular acts: the casting of an augury spell, any curing or healing spell, any informational spells, and all such spells that can only be cast upon the cleric himself or herself. The casting of any of these spells in a different fashion, i.e. a cure light wound bestowed upon a companion, will cause the magic of the withdraw spell to cease. Similarly, the cleric who is affected by the withdraw spell cannot walk or run, become invisible, or otherwise engage in actions other than thinking, reading, and the like. The withdrawn cleric can be affected by the actions of others while under the influence of the spell, and any attack upon the cleric which succeeds will break the spell. So this is an interesting spell, and can be quite useful in a combat situation, but also may perhaps in any other situation where speed is of the essence. Yeah, I like this spell. It's interesting. A clever player can really gain quite a bit of advantage for it. And another spell called Wyvern Watch. This spell is known as Wyvern Watch because of the insubstantial haze brought forth by its casting, which vaguely resembles a wyvern. It is typically used to guard some area against intrusion. Any creature that approaches within 1 inch of the area in question is subject to attack from the spell force. The wyvern will strike, and any creature so attacked must make its saving throw versus spell, or else stand paralyzed for 1 round per level of the caster, or until freed by the spellcaster, by a dispel magic spell, or by a remove paralysis spell. A successful saving throw indicates that the target creature was missed by the attack of the wyvern form, and the spell remains in place. As soon as the target creature is successfully struck by the wyvern form, the paralysis takes effect, and the force of the spell itself is dissipated. The spell force will likewise dissipate if no intruder is struck by the wyvern form for 8 hours after the spell is cast. Any creature approaching the space being guarded by the wyvern form may be able to detect its presence before coming close enough to be attacked. This chance of detection is 90% in bright light, 30% in twilight conditions, and 0% in darkness. The material component is the cleric's holy or unholy symbol. So that's an interesting spell. I do wish there was some means for the cleric to know if the wyvern has struck, because 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds of paralysis is good, but it's only one creature since then the force dissipates. So if there's more than one person coming along, the others could just ignore the paralyzed one and keep going. So having the cleric be aware of when it's struck is, I think, not an unreasonable thing, and thus allows you to use this spell to guard yourself overnight while camping, perhaps, if you're in an unsafe part of the world. It can also be used to delay pursuers if you're in a situation where you know where the pursuers must go. The chance of detection is fine, but what are twilight conditions? Like, I have a torch. What is that considered to be? Perhaps I would have said torches and lanterns 50% because it's more than twilight, but I imagine bright light to be sunlight. I'd like a little bit more specificity on the chance of detection. This is a good spell. Adds to the possibilities of what a cleric can do. And since a cleric is about protection, something that helps protect you overnight makes sense. I do think that the shape of the Watcher doesn't need to be a wyvern. It could be something that's more attuned to the deity of the cleric. But again, that's more flavor than anything else. And that's the last of the second level spells, so let's go over them. So of the spells, Aid is pretty good. Detect Life, I don't like very much the way it is. As I mentioned, it should be changed. The Dust Devil could be interesting, and Thrall also, although I think the whole saving throw thing should be fixed for when you're in front of a large crowd. Holy Symbol was a sorely missing piece of the Cleric's spell list, and I'm glad to see it there. Messenger, another useful spell that a clever player can really use to his or her advantage. Withdraw can be very interesting, and so can Wyvern Watch. So I'm much happier with the new second level spells than the new first level spells. Though I do think Detect Life, the way it is, could almost be a first level spell. It's not that powerful. The other ones are pretty good, and I think are fine as they are. Like I said, much better list than the first level spells. So out of the 8, I think Detect Life is the weakest one. Others will require the player to really think about what they can do with that and plan it out carefully. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan looking at the second level cleric spells in Unearthed Arcana, and I'll see you next time.